From a highly secure network of top secret locations across North America, this is the Spurs Insider, another off-season post-lottery pre-draft edition of the podcast. I'm your host, Mike Finger, joined as always by our distinguished Express News panel of Spurs beat writers Tom Orsborn and Jeff McDonald, along with sports editor Nick Talbot. Tom Orsborn's secure location in Chicago, Illinois, is not quite as highly secure as his location for the lottery on Sunday for the second straight year. He turned over his cell phone, his computer, his recorder, all his electronic devices to go into the drawing room itself, where the numbers did not fall as perfectly for your local Cagers, for your Spurs, as they did last year. But the common theme, they still did pretty well. Tom, how's it going up there?
Good, Mike. Yeah, that's a good assessment. It was quite different from last year. Last year there was a palpable buzz in the room. It was crowded with media people, both inside and outside the drawing room. This year, the numbers were much lower inside and outside the drawing room because Wemby was not the prize. With no clear number one at stake, and with this draft, scouts saying this is one of the weakest drafts in years. There just wasn't that buzz that there was last year. But with all that said, Spurs emerged. When I got out of the drawing room finally and got my electronic devices back and made my way to the stage area, R.C. Buford, Brian Wright, Peter J. Holt, all smiles. And they were very happy with getting the number 4 and number 8 picks after the Raptors number 8 pick conveyed to them.
And Jeff, we've been talking about it since the season, about how this is probably one of the scenarios that they would have taken in a heartbeat if you would have asked Brian Wright or R.C. Buford on Sunday morning, if you can have the 4 and 8, would you take it? I think they would have taken that before you finished the sentence, right?
I think absolutely. And I was kind of having a discussion on that bad website that we don't like. An hour, 2 hours before the lottery drawing, just kind of proposing the hypothetical of if you're the Spurs this year and you could take from column A, you get the first pick, but no Toronto pick, or you get both picks, but you don't get the number 1. They're just somewhere in the top 7 or 8. Which would you take? And there was some argument on that website, but my contention was you take the second one. You take the 2 picks over having the overall number 1 pick, if those are the 2 choices. Just because this isn't, as our man on the scene, Tom, mentioned, that there's not that overwhelming number 1 prize that you're just dying to have the number 1 pick for. You'd almost want 2 bites at the apple in a class like this, so you have a better chance of landing that impact player. Everyone talks about this is a weak draft. It's one of the weakest drafts in a long time. But that doesn't mean there's no stars in this draft. If you look at any draft in history, there's always an all-star or 2 that comes out of it. They're just not always where you think they're going to fall. And this is one of those drafts where you might get the very best when it's all said and done. Look back 5 years from now and say, you got the best player at number 4 or number 8. So I think if this is a year to have multiple picks up there and maybe not such a big deal to have the number 1, I think this is that kind of year.
Right. When scouts evaluate drafts, when executives talk about drafts, whether it's before them or after them, and talk about the strength of them, generally all drafts are top heavy, right? And they're judged by the 1 or 2 or 3 all-stars, all-pro type players that come out of them. And the reason why this is not considered a great draft, one of the worst in years, is just because there's not that automatic guy up there. But from like Jeff mentioned, from 4 to 10, there's going to be usable guys. And in a way, it probably in a draft where there's not one head and shoulders guy above everybody, taking 2 shots at it to find that inevitable all-star that's going to come from this draft might be a more statistically prudent way to do that, to have 2 shots at 4 and 8 than at 1 or 2 and just getting 1. another thing is just to look back on how this could have gone for the Spurs. It wouldn't have been a huge upset at all for them to only get, say, number 7. That was a distinct possibility. If the Raptors got into the top 4 and the Spurs did not, that's what would have happened. Just only a 7. And so to come out with a 4 and an 8 to get 2 swings at this kind of shot in the dark, two darts to throw at the dartboard, that could work out pretty well. Now to transition into looking at this offseason, what do the Spurs do with those picks? Do they keep them? Do they make both the picks? Do they look for the point guard that we know they're going to add in this draft? Do they look elsewhere and look to sign a point guard? All these things are yet to be told over the next probably 4 to 6 weeks, counting the draft into free agency.
And I think all of those things are on the table too.
Yeah.
Brian Wright said as much after the at the staging area. Yeah. Yes.
Just knowing them, when you put
notoriously upfront and open and transparent Brian Wright and the San Antonio Spurs.
Just knowing.
But I believe him. He's going to consider everything. Go ahead.
Just knowing their history. If you had to put money on what is the most likely outcome of these 2 picks, the most likely outcome is the Spurs make them. They don't trade them. I mean, right. I think a trade is on the table, but my guess is they'll end up making both of them at the end of the day.
Well, I will crowdsource a newspaper column that's going to be, I guess it'll be in the paper when this hits the digital earbuds players of the listeners out there. But one thing the local columnist is writing about it is, I'll throw a premise out there and see what y'all think. This is the most unpredictable offseason that your Cagers have had in a long time, in that there is no obvious move. If you go back to the last few years, last year they win the lottery, they're obviously taking Wemby and starting out with the young group, seeing what happens. Everybody sort of saw from the lottery on what the Spurs offseason was last year. The year before, this is the year to kind of be bad on purpose for Wemby, to not try to win, to look at your young players, but there was no bold moves in store for the summer of 2022. In 21, they had to trade DeMar. That was the end of DeMar. Everyone knew what they were going to do. The years before that were kind of just hold the rope in between the Kawhi years and what came next. Go back to the summer of Kawhi. They had to trade Kawhi. This year, they could do anything. They could make these picks. They could trade these picks. They could push forward and try to go after a star. I don't think any of those options are less than 15, 20%. I could see them doing all those things.
It'd be the most unpredictable in decades. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of it too. You go back 20 years of the Duncan era, they always sort of were just building with what they had. LaMarcus Aldridge summer, I guess, was one when they went and signed a free agent, which they almost never did. But
even then, you knew that was they were going to try to do.
Right. I think on.
Wow, this is an amazing column. I can't wait to read it.
If you're entering June of any given year, going back to 1996 and maybe even before, I think this is the most difficult to predict offseason that the Spurs have had, because I could be convinced of 3 or 4 different approaches they could take. I think I have my sort of guess. I think we all have our guess as to what they might do. Like Jeff said, they're probably going to make the 2 picks. But I don't think that's more than a 65% likelihood. Do you?
Correct. I think that's fair. Yeah. If you're going back that far in history, I think you can just call it the most unpredictable offseason in Spurs history. If we're already back 35 years.
Nothing that happened before 30 years ago is part of history?
What were people, what was happening in 1982? Or 1981.
I don't know, that year they picked out Frederick Hughes.
There's one.
Tom will know all the history.
You know what I mean? Part of it, you have to weigh the consequences too. Whatever they were doing in 1981 didn't matter.
Right. That's the other part of this, is not only is it unpredictable, but the ripple effects could be far-reaching.
Stakes are high.
Stakes are high.
All right, so the Spurs picking these picks.
The flip side is I don't want to say that they better get this right or they're screwed. The one benefit of having options is you have options.
Yeah.
there are probably backup plans. But I think as I'm sounding this out on this podcast, that's almost an argument to not go too bold.
Yes. There's
right?
Yes. You have a lot of options. Some of those options you can mess up and it doesn't kill you. Like if you pick the wrong guy at 8 this year, well. Yeah. If you trade everything for, I'm not even going to say his name, but if you trade everything for Trae Young and it doesn't work out, then you really, that's hard to recover from.
Yeah.
So yeah, like what you're saying is correct. Like there's a lot of options and some of them, if you screw them up, will not set you back that much. And some of them, if you screw them up, you might have screwed up the entire Victor Wembanyama era before it even began. So I think that's worth weighing as well.
Well, let's get into the weeds here of just some specific ways they could approach like one position here this offseason. And I'm going to start with point guard because that's the one, that's the clear need, linchpin to the rest of the Wembanyama era. There are point guards available in the draft. I'm not sure any of them are sure. Well, I know none of them are surefire locks to succeed to be the point guard of the future. All of them have concerns, even at the top, like Nikola Topic just got hurt again. He's supposed to be okay. It was a sprained knee in the Adriatic League. I think he's already had a knee injury. The scouts like the way he creates, distributes, that type of stuff. He's not a surefire guy. Rob Dillingham at Kentucky, I watched some college hoops this year, really enjoyed the way he plays, but he's not that big. He's like 6'1", 160 pounds, and might be more of a best case scenario, like an off the bench Lou Williams 6-man type, which would be cool to have, but that might not be your answer at point guard for the future. And by the way, I'm not dismissing Rob Dillingham. If they take him, think he's the guy, that'd be great.
I talked to him today, Mike, at the availability, and really it sounded like a really good kid. Upbeat, good answers, but he was a little too honest for his own good when he was asked about his perceived knock. Not only his size but his defensive liabilities, and he admitted his effort last year wasn't always the best, and he didn't understand the game plans. So, well, it was refreshingly honest. But
maybe that's on Coach Cal.
The Spurs will pay.
Maybe that's
Spurs will pay close attention to.
Yeah.
Spurs could fix.
They're right. Coaches. But you're also in a situation where now you with Victor Wembanyama at the back of the defense, probably should have been Defensive Player of the Year, but who cares? He can make up for some defensive lack of size at the point guard position. He helps when Trae Young's out there. Trae Young's not the biggest Trae Jones. He could do the same with Rob Dillingham, whoever. Dillingham's lack of size is not a absolute red flag. You can't take him. But I will move forward with this exploration of the point guard position and ask about other options. You could trade for a star point guard. Jeff mentioned one name, which I do not think is going to come here. Trae Young, a teammate of Trae Young's, who I've pitched to the newspaper before not too long ago, who used to be a Spur, who still owes me $1 from the vending machine, DeJounte Murray. Like, that could be a kind of trade you make if, the Hawks just won the lottery. They probably are going to stick with the Trae Young plan for a while now, that they can support him with a number 1 pick. But the Murray Young thing didn't work.
Yeah, they have to trade one of those guys.
So maybe you can get Murray for cheaper than you could have gotten Young. You trade for Murray and you don't mortgage the whole future. Like, you don't have to give up the same amount of picks, talent, whatever to get him. That's an option.
Do you think DeJounte would veto a trade back to San Antonio just to avoid repaying your $1?
He might. But I don't know.
He makes more money now than he did then.
Yeah, I'm going to get that dollar eventually. But before I'll finish this out. So you draft a point guard. You trade for a star point guard. That's going to cost you a bunch. You trade for maybe a second-tier star point guard, DeJounte Murray type. Or you do another thing that could be considered, that I think was considered last year and might be considered more strongly this year. It is you acquire a placeholder veteran guy with skins on the wall like Chris Paul to come in while using your draft picks on the athletic wing types, the shooter types, to surround Victor Wembanyama with. Like, that's another option that I am not sold on, but I'm sort of intrigued by. I think those are 4 different ways you can just approach the point guard position by itself, not to mention the different college point guards you could draft. So do any of those options appeal to anybody on this podcast?
I don't know if it appeals to me, but I was going to mention the last option you mentioned, the bring in an old man veteran for a few years to play point guard. That's kind of one of the things that has taken Minnesota to the next level, is bringing in Mike Conley.
That's a good point.
To a young group. You know, there were other things too, like people panned it at the time, but bringing in Rudy Gobert made a big difference. And of course, Anthony Edwards emerging into a super duper star has made a big difference. But the thing that sort of, when they were in that sort of purgatory, the thing that sort of got them to the next step was bringing in washed up Mike Conley, who's been what they needed.
Who I believe is they acquired him. Who I believe they acquired at a younger age than Chris Paul would be, but still similar. It's a good comparison. And Chris Paul wouldn't be expected to be around until, the Spurs are contending for championships. It would probably be a couple of years, and the Spurs aren't gonna be in the finals in the next couple of years, I don't think. But that could be something that appeals. I know Chris likes Pop. It's easy to like Pop from afar if you don't play for him every day. Every good player in the league seems to like watching Pop on the other bench and playing for him for a few weeks for Team USA every now and then. I'm not sure everybody is in love with the idea of coming to San Antonio and playing for him full time. But that could appeal to Pop. Like, the question is if Chris Paul is a ring chaser now, if he's just doing everything he can to win that.
Right, that's what I was going to bring up.
And the Spurs don't fill that box. Don't check that box.
Yeah, that's probably better for Chris Paul at this point. I mean, if you watched him last year, he wasn't the same. I don't know, honestly, if he's that much of a help if they were to bring in a Chris Paul. And counterpoint to Jeff is
it would be mental. It would be presence. It would be. It wouldn't be like what he does. On the. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I don't like, if they bring him in, I don't think Spurs fans should expect Chris Paul, to be able to get the Spurs to that next step. That wouldn't be a realistic expectation. And the counterpoint to Jeff's thing also is, like, the 76ers tried to bring in Kyle Lowry too, and that didn't exactly help them too much. So sometimes, you really have to be cautious when you bring in an older guy and what your expectations are, because sometimes they will help, like a Mike Conley, and sometimes it's just too late to be able to do that.
Probably depends on who they are too.
Right. It really depends on
what their approach is.
The huge difference there is that the Sixers are trying to win a title with Joel Embiid, and the Spurs are just trying to make the play-in next year.
Right. That's why I said expectations.
That's the appeal of the Chris Paul option, is that you're not spending any kind of capital on him, other than money, which you have cap room. You got to use it someplace. You don't need to give up draft picks to acquire the guy. And he's just a guy to have around to teach players how to win. And if that means winning 36 games instead of 22, if it means winning 34 games, I think that's beneficial. And I'm not trying to tilt everybody in favor of the Chris Paul option. I'm just kind of defending it as an option.
Okay. I don't. Okay. I guess to answer all your questions at once, I think if you draft that quote unquote point guard of the future in this draft, I think you have to be willing to be patient and realize it might not really affect things that much this year.
Right.
I don't know. That's a big. Even if you have a guy that long term is going to be a better, an improvement over Trey Jones, I don't think that anybody you take in this draft in year one is going to be better than Trey Jones. So you have to be ready for that to take some. It's hard to be a point guard in the NBA. It's hard to learn it. There aren't a whole lot of guys that show up as a rookie ready to go and ready to lead a team. So you have to be willing to accept that's not going to give you a huge boost. Other than that, is there any? Can you start looking to target veterans that aren't all-stars, aren't Trae Young, aren't even DeJounte, but also aren't the other end of the spectrum where they're 47 years old and
right
washed up? Like I don't have names off the top of my head, but like guys in that tier, like maybe a lower tier.
A name that's popped up here is Malcolm Brogdon. A few
someone
times.
like that. Someone like that.
Yeah.
Can you
Tyus Jones?
Someone like that.
The other
free agent.
Tyus Jones, sure. Malcolm Brogdon, sure. There's going to be a numbers crunch thing too, because you can't take too many of these approaches at once. Let's say you draft Nikola Topic or Rob Dillingham, and you does that mean? And you still have Trey Jones. Does that preclude you from signing one of those fill-in veteran types? Because then now you have 3 point guards. You see what I mean? Like could you draft Rob Dillingham, keep playing Trey Jones, and also sign or acquire Malcolm Brogdon or Chris Paul? Or is that too many guys? I mean, maybe you could have all three of those guys around and bring the point guard along really slowly. But when you draft a guy in the top 8, that guy, you sort of expect to play that guy, don't you?
What if they draft 2 point guards?
They're not going to draft.
Oh boy, they better not do that.
I remember who was it? Minnesota drafted almost 2 point guards back to back and didn't draft the point guard that needed that year. What year?
Oh yeah, they took
like the Ricky Rubio year.
They took Ricky Rubio and Johnny Flynn and passed on Steph Curry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as we're laughing at this, I'm looking at NBA.com has a consensus mock draft. So they've taken 10 different mock drafts and taken like each player's where they fall the most in those 10.
Which is not a great way to do it. But
not a great way to do that, but I was just laughing because it has this has the Spurs taking Topic at 4 and Dillingham at 8.
Yeah, that's why the consensus doesn't work because you end up with stuff like that. That's not going to happen.
Reed Shepard's stock is soaring here after his testing yesterday.
Yeah, I don't know.
Did it take the ACT?
He's probably the best shooter in the draft.
You can save this and throw it back in my face in 10 years, but no, I'm not. I don't know, man. It's the sour taste of. I think he was held scoreless in Kentucky's elimination game in the NCAA tournament. He had a rough time.
How good was Dillingham in that game, though? We're just not taking any Kentucky players now.
He was better.
Not very much.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. The other thing is like I'm not sure either of those guys can defend anybody.
Well, that's what I'm telling you. Dillingham admitted as such today.
Yeah.
It wasn't just his size. He said, I lack effort and I don't know the game plan.
See, here's the thing. Because of the way this draft is, you can go through every pick and find a reason not to pick him.
That's true. So trade him. So trade.
Yeah. We don't want to pick anyone. What will you give us for this pick? This draft sucks. What do you want for this pick?
That's the other problem with this type of analysis is, do you take the pick or do you trade it? If you're going to say trade it, you need to give me a specific trade.
Exactly.
Like people are saying that about the Hawks, like trade the number 1 pick for a veteran guy or for a star. Well, who is that star? And if that's such an obvious move to make, then what kind of idiot GM is the one who's going to give up a star for the number 1 pick in the worst draft of the past 10 years? Yeah. Like, it's just easier said than done. And I've already heard from people saying, well, the Spurs should trade these picks for somebody good. But if it's that obvious, then the people trading somebody good don't want those picks. So we'll see. Tom,
They'll find somebody in the second round.
Yeah.
They got 2 picks in the second round too, by the way. They're going to have to trade something.
Yeah. I know this is ridiculous. It's sort of a running shtick, but the Kawhi trade still isn't closed.
Yeah.
And friend of the podcast, as pointed out by friend of the podcast, Bruno Passos.
Which means the George Hill trade isn't closed.
The George Hill trade isn't closed yet. For George Hill on draft night, those many years ago when George Hill was traded for Kawhi Leonard, who was traded for, I think the list now is Keldon Johnson, Malachi Branham, who came about as a result of the Thaddeus Young trade. This number 8 pick in the coming draft. And for DeMar DeRozan, they have some picks from Chicago, including a first rounder that's lightly protected next year, but should convey at some point, and another second rounder. So all that for George Hill. Pretty good job there.
By the way, the Spurs also got Davis Bertans in that deal too. They got Kawhi and Davis Bertans.
So we got to.
Well, if things
Dobbs ended up leaving for nothing, right?
If things had worked out, they would have also
Marcus Morris,
the cap room to sign Marcus Morris.
Yeah, what the butterfly effect, I think it's called, isn't it? You know, butterfly flaps its wings in South America, and a tornado happens in Oklahoma. I think a physicist said that one time.
Is that? Are you serious, Clark?
No, I'm serious. That was like a physicist came up with that.
I'm sure Victor could explain it to us better.
Go ahead, Jeff.
A physicist on ketamine or what?
Jeff, talk about your visit to the planetarium. I'm going to treat you like a kindergartner. What'd you learn at the planetarium, Jeff? While I look something up.
This is the most. I'm gonna blow your mind. Did you know Pluto's not a planet anymore?
Yeah, they got kicked out.
Yeah, we all know that.
Yeah, I was aware of that. That was a joke.
Okay.
You're supposed to laugh and not.
What else did you learn in the planetarium?
What else I learned?
What else was fun? Tell the listeners about why you went to the planetarium.
Have we talked
to San
to
Antonio
listeners?
College campus?
Have we talked to the listeners since Victor Wembanyama was named the Rookie of the Year? I don't think we have. Okay, so
what a shocker!
If you're just now tuning in, Victor Wembanyama was named the NBA's Rookie of the Year in unanimous fashion. One of only 6 players in NBA history to be named the Rookie of the Year. And a little bit after that, they invited everyone out to the planetarium to hand him his award.
Why'd they go to the planetarium?
There is some sort of alien, connection.
And Victor, and you asked Victor about a Pearl Jam album. Is that true?
Something like that. All right, so I'll run through the whole thing. So we had the little ceremony inside the planetarium itself, which, I'll be honest, I was a little cynical about this thing. I thought it was going to be doofy because that's just the kind of person I am. I like to crap on everything. Then I got there and I realized, they're like going to show us highlights on the ceiling where we used to like look at the stars and stuff when we went there as school children on field trips. Like, that's kind of cool. Like, they turn off all the lights and you're leaning back. And so they have all his highlights from the year, highlight tape displayed on the ceiling. So that was kind of cool. And then they gave him his award. Brian Wright presented him with the Wilt Chamberlain Trophy. And then they kicked the media out, and he just had a little deal with school children from all over the place. He gave a presentation that none of us have seen, but we were told it was on the concept of dark matter, which is just funny to me. Like, these kids came to see Victor, and they're getting a science lecture. That made me laugh so hard. But anyway, I asked him about it afterwards, if he could explain to me, who is I don't know if you know this, but I'm not a physicist of any sort, albeit an astrophysicist. So I don't know what dark matter is. And Victor explained it to us very, very, very well in his second language. So that was interesting. It went viral and stuff. That's always funny to me. When, like, I'm just being an idiot and ask him a question, and all of a sudden his answer travels around the world. That kind of makes me laugh a little bit. But yeah, it's a fun day.
And Victor, as his teammates were there, and
almost all of them. Yeah. I'm not going to name them because then the listeners will decide that the players that weren't there somehow hate Victor, and or jealous.
They obviously do. If they didn't go to the planetarium, they hate him and want to undermine his success. That's the only logical conclusion to draw. While we're on the subject of science, there was a mathematician and meteorologist in the early 70s named Edward Norton Lorenz. He noted
Great actor.
He noted that a tornado in North America, there's a possibility that could be derived, that could be influenced by minor perturbations, such as a distant butterfly flapping its wings several weeks earlier. He originally used a seagull causing a storm, but was persuaded to make it more poetic with the use of a butterfly in a tornado. That's what I mean. That like the butterfly flapping its wings in South America.
Yes, I've heard of the butterfly effect. Now you've named it.
Causes a tornado in Oklahoma.
All right, man.
Much like the draft night trade of George Hill. Well, what year was it? 2013, 2012? Maybe early. Might have been 2011. 2011. Yeah, 2011. That minor flat of R.C. Buford's wings. I'm just going to trade Georgie Hill here. And somehow you end up with Rob Dillingham. Right. And whoever the Spurs take in the second round in 2025. It's still going on.
I get your point, but I'm not buying I'm not buying. What's the guy's name? The astrophysicist fellow?
Edward Norton Lorenz.
Edward Norton. I'm not buying Ed Norton's.
Well, you can go to your local Blockbuster if there's still one around and find a Ashton Kutcher on it called The Butterfly Effect.
I've seen that horrible movie.
It has Ashton Kutcher in it. Of course, it's a horrible
movie. My degree's in journalism, so I far be it for me to say that Ed Norton is an idiot, but he's an idiot. There's no way that's true.
I think
there's no way that's true.
That might be
Ed Norton Lorenz, who was in American History X also. And the Rounders, he played Worm.
Rounders, that's Mike's kind of movie.
There you go. It's a pretty great movie.
I'm just not here for the dude.
What was that movie? He was in with Spike Lee, where he was
23rd Hour.
Yeah, that was a great one. I like that.
23rd Hour. 23rd. It was before he went to prison. It was the Tom, you'll appreciate this because we go back. Our careers in Marriott's go back several decades. You remember the old downtown World Trade Center Marriott?
Yes, stayed there many times.
And after 9/11, I was on a New York trip. It was that first year where they were still doing all the work down there, like cleaning it up. And you could look out by the elevators and see down in there. Yes. And it was very spooky and surreal and sobering and solemn and I'll never forget that experience of like looking down and seeing that out there. But in that movie, I can't believe we've come to this in this podcast. I think it's 23rd Hour, isn't it?
It was a great
25th
movie.
Hour.
Yeah,
25th Hour. That's what it is. There's a scene just like that. It's because it was a post 9/11 movie.
You're jogging my memory. I remember that.
It was there was a Spike Lee thing, and they have another view of looking down into the hole there. So I always equate that movie with the downtown Marriott there. Anyway, from your hotel in Chicago, anything else we need to know before we wrap up about what you're doing up there at the Combine? Any other tidbits?
I'm overlooking the Grant Park. Love that view. I don't know if you've stayed at the Blackstone, but yeah.
Yeah, I was there last year with you.
That's right. JFK stayed here. Al Capone. It's a long list of luminaries. Mike Finger,
yeah. Your last thing, your favorite tidbits that you picked up, favorite interview, favorite personality of the week so far.
Brandon Liebson, who represented the Spurs in the drawing room. Delightful fellow, little nervous about talking. Never been in that setting before, but he told me about his belt, his lucky belt that he wore. He went to his interview with the Spurs in 2018. He was interviewing for an internship.
And we lost Tom at the most crucial moment.
Right, apex of the story. Or
well, we're gonna have to. It's a cliffhanger. It's a cliffhanger,
folks. We'll find out about all of that. Maybe Tom. I think he mentioned it in the newspaper already. His lucky belt. I know I read that in the Express News.
I think people need to tune in 2 weeks from now to hear the exciting conclusion of this story.
We will be back in 2 weeks. Go ahead, Tom. Are you back?
No, he did well. 4-8. You know, they were all slapping his back and congratulating him. He did a fine job. You know, number 4 and number 8, and they came within, one digit. They needed a 3 on the number 1 pick. They wound up with a 13, but they were that close to
winning it again. They might be better off. We might look back and think that was a fortuitous bounce that they didn't even appreciate at the time. 4 might be better than 1 this year. You never know what the ripple effects of that 1 digit might be. You never know what the ripple effects of the listeners out there listening to this podcast today. Maybe it kept you away from the worst decision you would have ever made in your life during the 30 minutes you spent listening to our nonsense. We might have saved multiple lives. We might have saved millions of lives. Who can say we didn't? Until next time, 2 weeks from now. Take care of each other and keep it real.